Now, next week, senior Tories, including cabinet ministers, will be gathering for a new conference discussing what it means to be conservative. And in a week when the Tory government has nationalised another railway and dropped plans to axe EU laws, some might say this is not before time. One of the speakers will be Miriam Cates, elected Tory MP for Penistone and the Stocksbridge in the Red Wall in 2019 and tipped by some as a possible future leader of the Conservative Party. Miriam Cates, welcome to Chopper's Politics podcast. There's a big conference next week called NetCon, isn't there? Now, what is NetCon?
Well, NetCon, I think, started in America, but it has branches around the world. And it's really a recognition of the fact that conservatism has perhaps strayed away from its core values. And I suppose that was really encapsulated in the realignments that we saw here in 2016 and 2019, but other parts of the Western world have really seen as well, where small c conservatives have kind of joined together with, new conservative voters in industrial areas, in areas that have had economic decline.
That's the Red Wall.
The Red Wall have voted together with traditional conservatives, and that whilst we have seen this realignment across the world, it hasn't really been capitalised on anywhere. I mean, you could say, maybe some parts of America, some American states have kind of lent that way, but we certainly haven't lent into the realignment enough in this country. And NatCon is, really a recognition of that and an attempt to explore what conservatism looks like for the 21st century.
And is it family values? Is it the term woke wars? What is it?
Well, there's a whole range of speakers.
What do you think it is?
Some of whom I've never heard of,
but
and I don't know what they're going to speak. So, yes. So what I haven't finished writing my speech yet, so this may completely change by next week. But what I really want to explore is the link between cultural and social values and economic values. And I think sometimes as politicians, we are expected only to speak about the economy. And of course, the economy is very important. But then when you talk about social or cultural issues, you're labelled as a culture warrior or someone who's on a moral crusade. Whereas I think they're actually inextricably linked. If you want a strong economy, you have to have strong families. And so you can't pretend that the state should have no interest in how families work. So,
and the Tories have been quite half-hearted on that. I remember David Cameron did a kind of a family check on all government policies, and it was meant to be a kind of a review of it had to be family friendly check on, and that all fell apart. And then there was a marriage tax allowance that is so complicated that very few people even take it up now, don't they?
That's right. I mean, it's utterly half-hearted, and the situation for families in this country economically is very disadvantageous compared to many other countries in the world. I mean, that our tax system doesn't recognise families at all,
and it should do.
And it should do, because if you want a strong economy in the future, if you want to grow and nurture the kind of children and young adults that become the workers and the leaders and the entrepreneurs of the future, then you have to have a firm foundation. And, we know so much about the impact of the early years and what happens to you if you have a bad experience in those early years. And yet we don't follow that through with policies that help those early years to be more secure.
What kind of tax breaks should be out there for families?
Well, I think at the very least, we ought to have household taxation rather than individual taxation. So at the moment, let's say your next door neighbours are a couple without children and they both earn £49,000 a year, let's say. They pay basic rate tax. They probably have lots of lower bills because they don't have children. Next door, you've got, dad on 80,000. Mum doesn't earn because she looks after kids. She looks after elderly relatives. They pay high rate tax. They lose all their child benefit. They have all the costs of raising children. That seems a basic unfairness. And I think we don't talk about that enough in this country. We don't realise what an outlier we are in how unfriendly our tax system is to families. But it's just things like that. I mean, they're not going to make all the difference in the world.
So you could group the family income into one, and then get double the tax breaks, whatever it might be.
And to recognise that having children is an investment in society. And I think one of the things we've done through our tax system and through our social policies is to basically say having children is a private enterprise. Only do it if you can afford it. We're not going to help you. It's your responsibility. It's a luxury. Having children is a luxury. But actually having children is absolutely essential for the future of our society and bringing them up well. Why shouldn't the tax system recognise the investment that you're making in society? Just 30 years hence, we're we're looking at just 2 working age people to every pensioner. I mean, if you think taxes are high now, if you think the NHS is underfunded now, you haven't seen what's coming down the line. And this is where social and economic policy have to go hand in hand. And as Conservatives, we cannot be afraid of talking about social and cultural issues because they have such a big impact on the economy and vice versa. And I think it's a mistake for politicians to only speak about one of the 2 sides of the coin.
So you're trying to move on from Thatcherism, do you think, in the Tory party thinking?
Oh, absolutely. And I, would be so bold as to say that Thatcherite economics are not truly conservative. Because, in my part of the world, in South Yorkshire, in Stocksbridge, in a steel town, Thatcherism destroyed our local economy. And we haven't recovered because the good, secure, high-status jobs that the steel industry and the coal industry provided have not been replaced with anything. And you can look at overall economic growth across, looking at the country, but it's a completely different story in the north and in the regions to it is in London. It hasn't been fairly spread. Community has to have an economic engine. It's not just about nice high streets and volunteers doing nice things for each other. Industries like the steelworks didn't just build the means of employment. They built the sports club and the golf club and the housing even. It was the economic engine of the community that has been lost.
How is the Tory party at the moment? Your party lost over 1,000 council seats last week. What does your PM need to do next?
Well, I think it's very difficult to draw any theory of everything conclusions from local election results.
Why can't we? We're in a pub.
It's too early. You haven't given me a gin and tonic yet, Chris. Well, I just think there are so many local factors in local elections, as well as turnout and things like that. And, on a vote share, Labour underperformed their poll ratings. But I do think one of the issues, as I said earlier, is we haven't lent in enough to this realignment. On the doorsteps, when I was knocking on doors in Stocksbridge, which is, a landlocked town in the middle of England, what was the issue that came up again and again? Small boats. You haven't yet sorted out the small boats. These issues are really big to people still. And I think people can see we're trying, but they want to see proof of the pudding. So I think we need to really lean into those kind of cultural and economic concerns that people have. I think Rishi is on the right track. I mean, he's being very bold on the social and cultural issues that I really care about. He's absolutely right.
Sex education.
Exactly. What other political leader has been bold enough to speak about those things and to commit to sorting them out? He's not been in the job long, but I think he absolutely is leaning in the right direction, especially on immigration and things like that. So it really is early days in his leadership, and I wish we had longer, but we don't. And that's why we need to be very bold and very decisive about leaning into the voters who voted for us last time.
Labour's attacking the Tories now over the 12 years they've been in government, fair enough. What is the single biggest achievement of that 12 years in power, do you think?
Well, I don't think we've seen the fruit of it yet, but I will say Brexit. And I know that Brexit is not as popular as it was. But I think when we look back in history, the act of actually managing to leave the EU will be seen as a significant achievement.
And the irony was that wasn't party policy.
It wasn't.
It became policy.
It was accepted reluctantly, I suppose. And I voted Remain at the time. I had 3 under-7s and I wasn't interested at all in in politics. But I totally accept that we have not seen the benefits of it yet. But I do think we will. And I think if you look at the EU as a whole and the issues around democracy and transparency and relevance, we will come to see that as a defining moment.
Brexit was a power transfer, wasn't it? From people saying to politicians, we're taking it away from the EU and giving it to you in Westminster. And there's a sense that the people in Westminster, the officials, MPs, whoever, haven't really grasped the opportunity given to them by the people in 2016.
No, absolutely. And it's the kind of, when you're buying a house, you exchange contracts before you move in. And I feel like we're at the point where we've exchanged. The intent has happened, the legal manoeuvres have taken place, but we've not moved in yet. That's how it feels. And of course that's going to take a long time because of the number of years that we've been inextricably linked with the EU. But we have got to get going on the positives of it. And part of that is about sovereignty and democracy, but it's also about the real life impacts of things like, changing VAT thresholds and the things that affect ordinary people's lives.
Using those freedoms that the people have been given.
Exactly.
You held your seat in Penistone and Stockbridge with 7,210 majority.
I won my seat.
In 2019. How will you hold that?
By staying true to the issues that people elected me and the party for. And I think as an MP, it's always tempting to think that it's about you. It's not about you. People vote for the party.
It's a bit about you.
It's a bit, but I think, really this is about speaking up for and championing the issues that ordinary people elected us for in 2019.
Staying grounded in that.
And levelling up. People laugh at the phrase levelling up, and perhaps it wasn't the best choice of words, but my constituents understand what that means on a kind of emotional level, which is we just don't have the opportunities, the economic security that other parts of the country have, and that's what we need.
Now, you've got some fans in the party. Bill Cash tells me you've got a heart of gold and a spine of steel because of your work on women's rights and on online porn and the rest of it. I mean, how do you feel when you have like Bill Cash, the ultimate really grand old man of the party, saying that about you?
Well, honoured and humbled, to be honest. And I'm also a massive admirer of him and working with him closely on the online safety bill as we have, and learning from him about, not just the issues, but how Parliament works and how we can change the law and how to gather colleague support has just been an incredible privilege and a real education. And he absolutely is a grandee of the party, and what he's achieved over the years is phenomenal. So it is,
he's
it's
pro,
humbling.
isn't he?
It is, and it is one of the best parts of this job, the people that you get to meet and work with and learn from. People think of Parliament as quite a fractious place to work and everybody's at each other's throat. It's not like that at all. It's very collaborative, or it can be.
Some people tell me you are a future Tory leader.
Well, I've not done very well so far, have I, Chris? I think I'm probably the only 2019 and not to have even been a PPS, probably.
Because you're independent. You know your own mind. But you're getting a fan base. Would you ever be leader of the party?
Well, if I can win my seat the next time, ask me again. But I mean, I've only been a party member fewer than 5 years. Were you a member before that of a different party or not? No, actually, I think I joined the Labour Party when I was 17, but I was trying to remember for a year when Blair came in. And I suppose I've got a different perspective to people who've been doing this for a long time because, my life has been relatively ordinary, rooted in, my local community, stay-at-home mum, all the kind of normal issues that people face. And I suppose I see things quite differently to people who've been involved in the party since they were 19 and knocking on doors and being spads. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all. You need the different levels of experience. But, I suppose that's what motivates me to speak out about these issues, even when they're not necessarily the party line, because, this is what my life was like before. This is what it's going to be like again. These are the issues that really affect normal people. And, I think sometimes the Westminster bubble has a totally different take. I'll give you an example. When I talk about things like childcare and some mums actually wanting to be at home with their children, people in Westminster go, oh, you can't say that. If you go down in my constituency and say that, everybody's like, yeah, of course, absolutely. These points of view are not particularly astounding outside of London.
Well, the budget talked about more money for childcare. There's no more money for stay-at-home mums.
No.
Was that wrong?
It's absolutely wrong. I can't think of a policy that has been announced during the last 3 years that I've been more upset about, to be quite honest. And I've got to be honest, I did actually shed a tear on a government minister the day it was announced, because it's utterly unconservative. The idea that the role of a parent, the role of a mother, is to get back to work and contribute to GDP, and that you can somehow outsource that, unbreakable bond to institutional childcare. As brilliant as those care workers may be, no one can replace mum. And there's, plenty of evidence that suggests that some external childcare from the age of 3 can be helpful for cognitive development. Of course it can. We know that 3-year-olds need to be socialised. But there's very little evidence of any positive benefits for very small babies. And in fact, there's quite a lot of evidence about the negative impacts of things like the rise in stress hormones in babies that have a long time away from their mothers. That has permanent impacts on things like ADHD and behavioural difficulties and attachment and ability to regulate your emotions. These are known about phenomena. How can we as a government say it's fine to put your child in 30 hours a week of state childcare, get back to work? It's utterly unconservative and it will be disastrous.
Is there a bias because people talking about it are often people who have their kids in care? So the voices to describing a policy are ones who support it and are used to it, whereas maybe the audience for it don't really accept it.
Yes, I think that's part of it. But I also think that these policies are made by people who live in this metropolitan liberal bubble. And it's very difficult, it seems to me, for those people to understand that for most people, their whole lives does not revolve around economics. This is what we saw in Brexit. How can you vote for something that makes you poorer? Well, it's not about that. It's actually about something much deeper than, is my monthly bank balance going to change? And I think for people with very important careers that give them status and recognition and respect and money, men and women, they don't understand how people would take the hit on income to spend more time with their children. But that is actually the normal human experience. But that's not really understood around here. And so I think the policies are made by people who can't imagine anyone choosing that emotional connection over economic success.
So it's time to celebrate stay-at-home mums.
Absolutely. And let's remember, stay-at-home mums don't stay at home. It's a term that everybody understands. I don't have a problem with it. But, they are not just looking after their own children. They are building the foundations of community. And they're building foundations of the future.
Well, Miriam Cates, one of the star speakers at NetCon next week. Thank you for joining us this week on a busy morning for Choppers Politics Podcast in Red Line Pub. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.